Well, welcome, Lauren Skelly. It's a pleasure to finally get to connect with you. I know we've been um, both jumping back and forth. I know on this end, UTechDic just opened up to the public, so it was this big transition back into the different kind of real life. Um, uh, and I can imagine everyone going through changes like you are too. Um, I'm hoping that we can connect you with our audience here virtually. And something that I've been talking to a lot of the artists about in particular is kind of their connection to clay. So where you got started, how you found clay, how you maybe fell in love with clay, and if you would talk about that journey of what got you going and how it got you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me tonight. It's exciting to be here. I'm really appreciative for the opportunity. But I got started with clay. I think I was 16 or 17, and I kind of hit a rough spot in high school. And my mom signed us up for wheel throwing on like a Saturday because it was something we both had never done before. And it kind of took off. I mean, she's a bit more functional. I'm a bit more dysfunctional. But we still make together on like here and there. I mean, lately she's been a lot more helpful with helping with my 2-year-old, which has been definitely an adventure. And I think some of that's pouring into the work right now too, like specifically with like the color dimensions. But so we continue taking these classes. And then when I went to Adelphi University, I was in an intro to 3D class. And part of one of the projects we had was to make like 5 bowls on the wheel. And we learned it for a few weeks. But they had found out that I was, I guess, like the secret potter in the class, but I had previous knowledge. So it wasn't like I was straight out like the secret potter. So I got invited to a barbecue and I got to meet the whole ceramics department, and I really kind of fell in love with the community that they had. We also had an anagama kiln on campus, which was like really sweet, and it was really nice to be able to like be a part of that kind of community. So I was invited to take an intensive in the summer, and then it led to becoming like a TA and a ceramics not tech, but like a studio assistant. So I was pugging their clay and mixing their glazes and loading their kilns and kind of like helping wherever I could. And really fostered a great community of like women and men in the studio. It wasn't super macho, which was kind of really great, like after everything we've been hearing lately. And then I stayed an extra year. They needed like the studio assistant, and I needed a studio, and I had enough grad credits racked up that I was like 12 shy of an MA. So I stayed on for an extra year. And basically I just was working my portfolio as much as I could and working for them. And I managed to get an MA like roughly in 2 years because they like missed a credit. And I didn't find that until I was like at RISD for my MFA, like the second week. And it was like, wait, what? But they did hook me up with an apprenticeship in Florence that summer. So in 2014, I got to be an apprentice for a Maiolica artist in Florence for 6 weeks and get grad credit and like officially graduate. And it was really awesome being there and like just like learning more about the culture and enjoying the pasta and the pottery and like all of it. So when I came back, my work hadn't really changed, but I think my perspective on color did. And the work I was working on in grad school was more installation based. I had come up with a way of layering slip on plaster bats so that I could peel up like these like sheets of clay and build up this like coral or like kind of rococo floral form. And I was basically process addicted to making these corals and building these seabeds. And for me, they were a connection to someone who I had lost at a young age, and like creating this like space that I imagined that we would be in together. And for everyone else, I think it was just like really interesting to see how many glazes I was making and just like the abundance of like texture. But then towards the end of grad school, like I had built this huge installation and it was kind of like, I wasn't sure where the work would go next. But I lucked out, I had gotten a residency at Vermont Studio Center and I started to kind of explore it more and like pull it apart and kind of play with the vessel more, which was not something I had considered. And for a while I was like, what am I doing? But like I was more of a functional potter in undergrad. It kind of makes sense that that would travel back into the work. And then I've been teaching on and off since then. And recently I acquired a studio in Dumbo because where I live in New York, there's like no foot traffic. And I thought if I had a spot in Dumbo that I would get more foot traffic. And in the last year, that's definitely proven to be right, despite everything going on. Um, I've also involved myself with the New York City Crit Club, which has been great to just get feedback from like other people that are not in our field, because sometimes like we're so deeply embedded in our own work. I think it's sometimes hard to see beyond like the glaze or like what clay body we were using, and more of like, is the work doing what I think it is doing? And it's definitely made me more confident in talking about the work for the last year of taking these different courses, which are basically like anywhere between, I think it's like 5 and 10 weeks. And they have visiting artists come in and you get to share like 6 or 7 slides. It's a quick crit. But you're kind of meeting so many other people like within the art world frame and building connections. And from from those opportunities, I've actually decided that I don't really use the wall space in my studio, but there are a lot of artists that like make work for the wall, or there are a lot of parent artists that aren't getting enough like recognition. So I'm hosting a series of like empowerment walls where I'm inviting artists to display work on my studio walls for a pop-up for like 2 to 3 weeks. And then I'm promoting the work through my Instagram, as well as doing like conversations like this, hopefully, but maybe through Instagram or maybe through Clubhouse, and kind of trying to like create this community that like I really want to be a part of and that like I want others to feel a part of. So I know that was a lot, but basically I just think that like all these different things have just like lined up for me to become and like help bring about like a good community of artists. So
that's great. And I know one of the hardest things for artists when they leave an academic setting is to keep going, is having community and creating and being part of either whether you're creating the community or nurturing the community, or finding where that community lies, whether it's virtual, physical.
It's particularly hard, I think, during the pandemic, because like I'm a social person, so like not being able to like talk to people or like do a thing was really hard. And this like crit club group, which I think is something that like the ceramic community could embrace more too, is like to start these groups where people share work or just share a few slides, and maybe that's something like I'd be happy to get more involved with if like anybody wants to do that. Because I think it's so important. We get like hyped up around all these conferences to like get with a mentor and get with this and do all these things, but there's like a whole other like 50 weeks of the year where like we could be doing these things and offering those opportunities. And maybe it would even be cool to have like galleries involved to say, hey, we're gonna do like what do they call it? They did it recently around here somewhere. I think they called it like Slide Slam. So it's a juried thing, but people get the opportunity to have 10 minutes and they just have like streamlined crit for that 10 minutes. And then the work is like promo. But like that could be a cool way to like keep that, I guess, the online from all over the world community going, like post-pandemic, hopefully,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and keep me in mind for that. I mean, I'd love to be either volunteer some time for that or participate. Something that hits home for me with all that is, there's these coming out of pandemic as we all convene, there is some silver linings from that experience. And it is that kind of global or farther reaching connection to be able to have these conversations without having to fly somewhere, physically go visit like a conference to get together. So to be able to have these exchanges of like a critique or, something I would like to keep growing. I do it in email a lot with artists that submit work. I try and give some feedback, even if we might not move forward with working with them right away. But like everybody has. It's
hard because I'm sure you guys are getting like so many submissions that it's hard to kind of keep track of that kind of thing too.
It is tricky. Yeah, it is. It is tricky. Something I encourage artists to do is to just keep me in the loop, like keep sharing, and I think that's a good practice for any artist there too.
Right. And I think Instagram has kind of made that easier too, to like shoot an image, like if you're like working on something. I know like for me, like some of these, I think Instagram is like kind of blown the door off, like not worrying about cold emailing somebody, because like if someone's liking your work consistently for weeks, I feel like that's kind of like an open door to be like, hey, I noticed you liked my work, like I have a show coming up, like if I sent you the link, could you send me just some feedback, like is it doing anything for you, and that's like worked out. I have some opportunities popping up. I can't talk about them yet because they're not like in contract, but like there are unofficial things coming up which are really exciting because they're things that like I've dreamed of, and like if I didn't push myself to like message them to be like, hey, would you come for a studio visit? Which is where that Dumbo Pandemic Find Studio came into play, which was like, it's not a lot of money and I have access to a roof with a view that people like pay for a penthouse to look at. And that's been kind of incredible because like sometimes like, and I think that's drawn me to working in like some non-ceramic materials in my work a little bit, just because like if I go paint the piece on the roof, like I get this gorgeous view, I get to take a breath and just like appreciate what is around me, you know. And I think that like shimmeriness is kind of I guess embedding itself into the work a bit more too, which has been really nice to kind of just, you know, open up
Yeah.
Pandora's box a little, like just a little bit more. You know, the acrylic feels like dirty a little bit, like putting acrylic on porcelain or like on clay that's been glazed, but at the same time, I guess like I enjoy it just because like the play on materials is just so captivating to me at the moment, and it feels very space-like, you know. But,
Yeah. I was in reading about your work and your statement, you had mentioned kind of responding to coral. And what I'm drawing is just it's interesting hearing you talk about like inviting people into your space. And I know that the work is, I want to talk about the work specifically with that. But it's interesting to me because I think what you're also doing in referencing coral is like you are becoming a place that is a ecosystem, bringing people in like a coral aids and is a sort of a breeding ground is not the right word, but like a meeting, a convergence of
great.
of
Thanks.
different folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just dawned on me as you were saying that. I was like, wow.
I think that like need to be like kind of a connector definitely came from like grad school when like opportunities like may have not been present, and like I was a part of the grad student alliance and we tried to come up with opportunities for artists to get out there. And I know that like since grad school I've tried to like, you know, like keep people on the radar, or just like even if something's not a good fit for me, like still like tell someone else about it, you know. And I think like I definitely think building that community is like vital for all of us. Like I might not get anything out of it, and that's totally fine. But if someone else is getting pushed forward, like I feel like excited for them, you know. So, but thanks for mentioning that bit about the coral. Yeah.
Yeah. This is like, well, so like and I think you've already kind of touched on this, but from like a technical aspect, I mean, you mentioned kind of coming from pots as a background. To talk a little bit about process, are you coil building these forms or some of these altered from the wheel still?
Right. So the current work is a mix of things. I was like lacking space and I had a lot of storage and a lot of things. And I think most of us as ceramic people, we like cling on to previous works, you know? And I was kind of thinking about like second chances a lot. And I think that was like just a theme in my mind throughout this whole pandemic was like, you know, like, I feel like sometimes we have opportunities and like something doesn't work out. And like what happens to that, just like as an idea. And I started thinking about these pots that were like, they were my first pots. So like some of them are not, there's a ton of imperfections, but if it was the bones of something else that grew off of it, which is what it was, right? Like I moved from one piece to the next piece to the next piece or to another body of work. So I actually started building with wet clay on fire pieces and like creating like a whole new sculpture. So a lot of these are wheel thrown, but then I'm coil building on top of that and adding more material and adding these sheets of like porcelain or stoneware or what have you. And then on top of that, there's usually another 3 to 4 firings. And then like maybe I'm doing lusters. And then after that fact, I have found some other materials during this pandemic that are doing things that I don't think ceramics can do right now, which is like basically create like this like rainbow hologram on a piece, which you can't always see it in the work that's been photographed. But if it's taken outdoors, you can see it. Like it rings off like those Pokemon cards I think of my youth, or you know, any Lisa Frank things that you've seen probably in the past. Stuart Simple makes a mirror paint and it looks like white gold luster, except it is cheaper and I don't have to stick it in a kiln. And it is like stinky, but like you can wear a mask or go outside and do it. But for $40, you get 15 grams. And allegedly they did like, I think it was like 3 or 4 tape measures the whole length in this paint. You do have to put like a varnish over it to like keep it. But it like there's some other artists who were like, oh, that's like a really cool white gold. And I'm like, yeah, totally. But it's not, it's this mirror paint, which I think is kind of awesome because like as a parent, I'm also trying to find things that I don't have to fire so much. That cuts down the time that like I would be in the studio and frees up more time to be with the kid, which is great. But process wise, yeah, like, and I hadn't thought, like, I always thought like, I don't know, I think the reality is we're told that you can only fire something a certain amount of times because you're firing in someone else's kiln. And if you mess up their kiln, that's a big deal. But if you're firing in your own kiln and you're like taking the necessary precautions to make sure that it's safe, you can do whatever you want, you know? And that took me a long time because in grad school at one point I was firing things like multiple, like so many times. And I think the tech was like, what are we doing? Like, what's going on? You know? And at one point I had like, you should always ask people when they hand me down things to you that they're the right cone temp. Someone gave me porcelain and I was like, oh, it's high fire. And I used it as pancakes and the thing melted entirely. And I washed my shelves and it came up perfectly, but it bloated. The whole thing bloated. And I was like, oh my God. And I had called the tech over, you know, Rick from RISD. And I was like, oh my God. And he was like, and then we like picked it up and he's like, we are so lucky that you washed your shelves because like, oh my God. It just looked like, I don't know, like bad pancake batter on a thing, which, and I get that, like I get why we wouldn't do those things, but I'm trying to do those things in mind with what I'm doing so that I'm not screwing up my kiln. So I haven't had that kind of issue yet, although I'm gonna knock on wood now because that's like out there.
Well, and I would hope you'd feel this way too. Is I think there's something liberating about not simply only relying on glazes, like traditional glazes, and finding other things. I mean, I think, you know, in the way that I look at your work is from more of a fine art lens, right? It is clay. It doesn't have to come from pottery or craft. That as when you look at something as an art object, just like when we look at paintings, there's a less of a conversation about which kind of paint did the painter use, and more of the conversation about what is the painting do for me or make me feel, or what is it about. And so I think I've seen more and more people in our field now, you know, using other materials, and kind of, I think that's like a pretty healthy freedom that as we continue to evolve.
Definitely.
Doing that I think is great, you know, so we don't have to bind ourselves to, oh, it's not glazed, I can't use it, you know. So it's cool to hear that you're experimenting with that. And
it's funny because like I've been looking back on things too, and I guess like we do photo dumps sometimes off our phones. And one of the most recent photos that I found that I was like thinking about was like Larry Bush used to paint his wood fire pots with flowers, and those were acrylic. And I have a picture from like a faculty exhibition, and I think like somehow we had, I guess, like got the caption, and it was just like a pot with painted flowers. And I'm like, that's so like sassy for him, you know, like, but it was just kind of like a nice memory to be like, yeah, you know, like you've been around people that have been doing this. Like, this is like not like a crazy thing to do, you know? And I think it is very liberating to kind of like break the rules, no matter how mundane they might seem to like other people, you know, it's like we're all on our own little like clay journey. So.
Yeah. Well, speaking of clay journeys, you know, something I've been checking in with everybody about is, like, especially now, I mean, now we're kind of, you know, asking this question from a slightly different lens, kind of coming out of this sort of COVID hunkering down. What are you excited about coming up for yourself? It sounds like what you've got going in studio, wall collaborations is great.
Right, and I have some things going to a fair, which I think I can say that without getting into too much trouble. But lately I've been, I think, more excited to bring my daughter into the studio and to be like working on like art things with her. We have a house and have 18 stairs, and one of our goals is to use the stair lifts and use tiles and make tiles with her every year, which I know like 18 years, you're like, I hope you get to the 18-year mark with her. But, you know, like maybe we'd make a few, but I'm hoping that like we can work on that project coming up. But she seems really interested in making, she actually comes into the studio at least like twice a week and talks to me about color, because she's learning about color for the first time, and she's seeing these things for the first time, and like has no background in anything. And it's like kind of refreshing just to be like, what do you think of when you see it? And she's like, it's like an orange, like that's bright. And I'm like, yeah, you know, like So she's like making all these like small, and it's great to see her use descriptive words at two, like she knows her colors, and we can talk about those things, but sometimes it's just kind of nice to like be caught up in like her wonderment of exploring an object. And I think that I've been
Mhm.
using that kind of idea of like the first awe to kind of work through some of the work that I'm working on now. So I'm excited to work. I'm also
Cool.
excited to kind of go back to school face to face. I teach at Iona College up in Westchester, and I'm excited to work. I teach intro to 3D, so I'm excited to kind of just like be in a room with people and make things. We're also excited to kind of take over campus, maybe with some like outdoor installation work too. So I guess I like all cylinders rolling, and I'm excited to like kind of go back to that within
Yeah,
me, you know. But
that sounds awesome. No, it sounds like you've made the most of what you've been dealt in the last year and really coming out of it with a lot of momentum. That's awesome.
yeah,
Cool. Well, yeah, I hope everybody checks out your work online with us. And I hope to, something I've been saying to everybody too, I hope that this can be kind of a continued dialogue, whether through sharing work with each other, showing work, um, collaborating curatorially, just anything down the line. I would just want to encourage you to keep reaching out and vice
yeah,
do the same.
definitely.
But I
If
hope
if
through these
anyone else wants to reach out
experiences.
with work, or they're interested in the empowerment space, like please, Instagram me or whatever.
Well, well, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. And I look forward to working with you in the future and hopefully meet at the conference in person eventually.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, keep up the great work and thank you so much, Lauren.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Brett. I really appreciate the opportunity to share more about the work.
My, my pleasure. My pleasure, really. I will see you soon.
See you.
Cheers.